The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone, and I'm hoping that you're hearing me. Please let me know if you can't. Just pop something in the questions box, and I'll fix the sound. So good morning and welcome to another 58 Kids Academy webinar. Today it's quite a topical one. We all know what's been happening in terms of in Canberra. It's been crazy few weeks that we've been observing. So I don't know whether or not anyone's quite worked out what happened. Even the sort of participants themselves, I think, are still saying that they really don't quite get what happened and why it happened. But nonetheless, it did, and that's just the nature of our modern day political environment, I'm afraid. We'll be exploring that a little bit today, and why this is the case. There's a lot of people who've got a lot of theories about this. I'm one of them, and lots of other people. But nonetheless, we'll be exploring that, but also some of the practical takeouts of what you may be able to do, may not be able to do in the coming weeks and months as we approach the next election. So that's what today is all about. As we go through, please do let me know. Sorry, Alana, you can hear me now? Just checking you can hear me? Or you can't see anything, is that right? Hang on a minute. That might be because I haven't shared the screen. That would probably be the reason. Sorry, I hadn't said anything, so that's good. Sorry about that. So today we're going to be looking at getting a pre-election political engagement strategy into shape in the context of these recent events and in the context of the fact that the election is likely to be at some stage in the next 9 months. We'll explore the possibilities of the dates of that election and what you can and can't do as an organisation or not-for-profit or a business indeed to think about what you can be, sort of how you can be shaping your asks or your approach to engaging with government. So I've got the question box open. If anyone has got a problem with any sound or anything else, please let me know, because it's just me operating the so I'm both sort of pedaling the bike and talking at the same time, trying to make it all work, and it is. I've also got a small puppy that's trying to jump on my lap at the same time, but these things happen in life. So let's just get started and have a think about what has been happening. Bear with me 1 second. There you go. So for those of you who need a quick refresher, what's happened in the last few months? Well, we all know that there were 5 by-elections on the 28th of July, which is not that long ago, really just a month and a little bit, really. How quickly time flies. Most were triggered by the constitutional dual citizenship crisis, as we know. And there were poor results for the government in those by-elections. By and large, there was quite a lot of support for independent parties in various places, but in particular there was a swing to Labor. In some cases, the swing wasn't as large as perhaps the opposition may have expected or anticipated, but nonetheless, I think the story and the narrative coming out of that by-election day, Super Saturday, was that it was a negative, set of events for the government. Invariably, by-elections are not ones that are usually won by government. They're always a fragile time politically for any government, and there's usually always a there's always usually some sort of impact on the government's hold on those seats. And that obviously happened. So coming out of that, then there was a couple of poor polls. Interestingly, just in the last couple of days, there's some private polling from the Liberal Party that was leaked to the media, I think it was yesterday, which indicated that just before the by-elections, and indeed even during the by-elections, broadly speaking across Australia, because we remember that, a by-election is a very much a microcosm of an election result across a country. It's not really going to, you wouldn't see a by-election result writ large across an entire nation on an election day. It just wouldn't happen in that way. There's so much focus on a by-election for a short period of time. People can sort of focus their angst and their sort of anger and annoyance in a short period of time, and the protest vote's usually higher in a by-election than it is in a normal election. But there's been some recent polling released, or private polling leaked to the media, which indicates that, actually the Liberal Party wasn't doing too badly in marginal seats, and indeed, the Liberal Party was being advised by their pollsters and their political advisors really just to hold the ship steady. And indeed, if you looked at yesterday's, there was some figures, economic figures that's been released in the last day or so, which indicates, the economy is growing strong. There's constant jobs growth, although the unemployment level isn't itself going down. The economy is in reasonably good shape. So the question, I suppose, that journalists are still posing to political leaders who were or weren't, or profess or otherwise to have been involved or not involved in the spill, is why did you change leader? I'm not sure that we're going to get to the bottom of that today, but it is an interesting thing nonetheless. So I think those circumstances then, snowballed reasonably quickly, as they do, and we'll explore the nature of these things in a minute about why these things are snowballing. Led really rapidly in some respects into the leadership spill, which we saw, which was obviously the sort of ramifications of that was that Malcolm Turnbull lost the Liberal leadership. So, hang on a minute, I'm just trying to swap pages. That's it. So why did we see the leadership spill? Well, I think we've now become so well versed, so well, expectant, if you like, of these leadership changes. I can remember, I've been in the building now for a number of them. In fact, I was with a client for 3 days during the leadership spill this week, that the most recent one, and it was really difficult. We were in meetings with ministers who were involved or not involved, and they were looking, they were on their phone, looking at the television, completely not focused on what was going on with the meetings that they're attending. And you can understand why, but nonetheless, from the outside world's perspective, whether that's a not-for-profit or a company or an individual, it's a frustrating situation to be in the midst of. And as we know, in the last 10 years, there's been a number of these changes, and people are still trying to grapple with why that is. It is interesting that Kevin Rudd was elected to government about the same time that the first iPhone came on the market, and I'm not saying it's the iPhone's fault, but what I'm saying is, I suppose, is that it coincides with our rapid ability to gain access to an extraordinary amount of information up to that point. I can remember I had a BlackBerry, or before that I had some other sort of phone that we would now think of as sort of an antique. We all have now, this extraordinary ability to get access to information in real time, and I think that helps to dig this situation in, and we'll explore that in a second. But I think we've all become so well versed at these leadership spills, but we really don't understand what do they mean for the not-for-profit sector. We know that it's difficult. There are changes, there is rotation, there's movements. but what else does it mean? And we'll have a think about that in terms of practical terms towards the end of the webinar. I suppose my view is, and I've got a story today in the Pro Bono Australia newsletter, but which is actually on the same topic, which prime ministers really have really quick use-by dates. And I think it was Laura Tingle, who's now the 7:30 political editor, who said not so long ago that, I'm old enough, and I'm sure there's maybe one or two of you on the line that can remember days where, governments were elected, and perhaps that, it was pretty expected that they would stay in for 2 and potentially 3 terms. That was just normal operating situation. That's just what happened. But nowadays, if a prime minister lasts for longer than a term, then we're going pretty well. And indeed, Laura Tingle made the point that in some respects we're actually now looking from pole to pole in terms of their credibility and their security of tenure in their role, which is very difficult for them to govern and for the government as a whole to govern, and in fact for the entire political process, not just, I think it's more writ large at a federal level, but I think those things still play out at a state level, but probably less so. You see less changing of the guard. I think the focus always does sort of fester and grow down in Canberra because it's the nature of that building. I think it's the demand for the new thing, the now thing. What do we need? I mean, I can remember when I was at home for a few days on that Thursday and Friday, and I was looking at Twitter, and every couple of seconds there was a new theory about someone walking into someone's office, or someone about to challenge, or the letter demanding a spill for the second time had X amount of signatures. I suppose again I go back to the fact that I'm old enough to remember when that just wouldn't have happened. You wouldn't have been able to access that information. There was no way of doing that. The phone calls didn't work that quickly. The general population didn't get access to that information. And so, you were sort of restrained from picking up the newspapers in the morning, or listening to the radio during the day, or listening to the news on TV at the end of the day for your updates. And you didn't really get that minute by minute developments through the day and how they were reported. So that's sort of, in some respects, I was watching, and I'm sure some of you were watching or listening avidly in various formats, various platforms, but, people were jumping at shadows, the shadows were jumping at people, and it was a sort of pretty insane environment. And I think that just, I have no more ability to predict how that will change or morph in the future than anyone else, but I can't see that it will easily, just because of the nature of how we're communicating, unless everyone decides to take a step back, and I'm not quite sure how that will happen. The frustration obviously is that it really does impact on real stuff. It impacts on us. It impacts on what we're trying to do, what we're trying to talk to them about, what we're trying to get them to act on. And I know that I was dealing with some staff in the health minister's office, and he'd resigned one day, and then his resignation wasn't accepted, but then he resigned again, and then he was back in. And so, I had a lot of not-for-profit clients saying to me, I'm in the middle of trying to talk to them about the mid-year economic review and whether they're going to make any announcements about my funding request. What do I do? This was a live discussion I was having just 2 days ago. What do I do? And it's really frustrating. I didn't have a perfect answer for them, unfortunately. So it just was one of those things. So then leads us on to thinking. Move on page-wise. Thanks. So let's look at the real changes that actually happen coming out of next week, and then we'll get back into a bit more sort of observation and some practical stuff coming out of it. Dan Tehan is the new minister. He's moved from social services. He was a social services minister. He's no longer in that portfolio. He's now the Minister for Education. Some of you may have connections into education, but he's now no longer the Social Services Minister. Paul Fletcher is now the Minister for Families and Social Services, and the portfolio has actually been renamed to have a broader remit. Michael Keenan is continuing as the Minister for Human Services, but the portfolio has been moved out of cabinet. No, I'm not sure. I haven't analysed the tea leaves whether that was payback, but it's someone's just asked me a question. I'll just respond to that. I wonder whether we could hear about the tips regarding political engagement strategies at the start of the meeting rather than the overview about the leadership spill. Okay, sure. We're getting to that right now. Alison, just bear with me. It's the next slide. Sorry. Michael Keenan, Zed Zazolgis has been announced yesterday that the Treasury and Finance, he's Minister for Treasury and Finance, and he's got responsibility for the not-for-profit sector. So, like it or not, it's our new operating procedure. Alison, if you have limited time, this recording will be up on our YouTube channel, 50 Acres TV, after the webinar a bit later on today, and you'll also get an email of the slides, so you'll be able to listen to it again. It's you can listen to it as many times as you like. It's great listening, I think. Better than any other podcast you'll ever listen to, I think, depending on how exciting your life is. So we really don't know when the election's going to be, but it's more likely to be next year than this year. And a lot of people say it's probably 9 months away. Who knows? 3 weeks ago, people wouldn't have said that there was going to be an election, a leadership challenge, and then there was. So who knows whether we're going to get one or whether we're going to, when we're going to get one, and whether there's going to be another challenge. There's talk that there'll be some payback, that the right of the party may still not be content, and all those things. And so really I don't have a clear inkling on that any more than a lot of other political pundits, but I think there's, anything's possible. But I think at this stage my bet would be on a May election next year. But people have said things before and been wrong. So if the by-election, in the by-election, Labor has held on to all 4 of its seats, and obviously the wholly contested seat of Braddon in Tasmania and Longman in Queensland. It's buoyed Bill Shorten's hope of victory at the federal election, and probably made the talk of opposition leadership spills far less likely. I would think that Labor would want to avoid that after this experience at all costs, because it didn't play out well with the electorate. So what does it mean for you or for your organisation in terms of engagement? And this is, I suppose, where we're all getting our rubber tyres to hit the road. So it's important for organisations to strengthen the relationships with relevant Labor politicians. If you haven't done it already, it is obviously a possibility, a reasonable possibility. And, I wouldn't ever predict the outcome of an election, not in these environments, not anymore. But I think it's obviously a reasonable likelihood that Labor might win the election. And, again, if you say on the basis of the by-election results, X seats would change hands. And as I said before, you really can never say that a by-election result will be, writ large in a federal election. But I think that, there's been, polls now for, many, many, many years, and we haven't, Liberals haven't been leading any of them. And so I think there is reasonable reason to suggest that Labor may win the next election. But I think the thing about elections are that they're often competed or they're often based on local campaigns. And I suppose it does really come down to how strong the local candidates are and how those campaigns are run, and if there's any local contentious issues that play out within various communities. And so you can look at polls and you can think that they're going to play out in a certain way, but things can happen that will swing elections pretty quickly. Just comments from leaders that get picked up on the media, and it's again going back to that the amplification of both the news cycle and the access to information that we have now via various platforms, I think, that help amplify and broadcast these slip-ups or the stuff-ups, if you like, that then, create these sort of potholes for politicians. I used to be an advancer many, many years ago for the Labor leader, Kim Beazley, and it wasn't that long ago, but 15 years ago. And it was, it was difficult, but we just didn't have the enormity of the social media outreach that we do today. And so there were things to avoid, but now it's sort of the amplifications are even larger in terms of if something goes wrong and these sorts of public visits, then things really easily do get communicated out to a wide audience. So, sorry, just trying to make... So what do you need to do? Your organisation, I think, needs simple, what I would call shovel-ready, good-to-go ideas that MPs can pull off the shelf and deploy. So, if you come up with a small or budget-neutral impact, all the better. I'm not saying that you don't put forward proposals that have budgetary implications. That would be a silly thing to say. Very few ideas have no or negligible spending implications. But if you can come up with an idea that has budget neutral impact, as in, if X or Y is funded, then this is the return on the investment, and you're able to substantiate those claims with some evidence and some data. It's really important that you don't just go in with an idea and a lovely picture on a piece of paper and go, we'd like one of these, please, and can you fund it? It needs to be much more than that now, and we need to be able to have some substantial reasoning behind why that new bright, shiny thing needs to be funded, or they won't do it. It doesn't matter the nature of the government, Labor, Liberal, or anything else, they just won't do it. So certainly from outside, that's not to say that you don't sometimes get, utopia-like situations where the ABC's program, where, crazy things are funded for no particular logical reason. That does happen. But I think when you go into government, it's your duty bound to have something that's reasonably well articulated. The new government, I'm meaning by the new Morrison government and opposition, will be looking for a quick wins to help them reach out to micro stakeholder groups. So we're talking, your organisation, your association, your member association, your local organisation, whether that's lobbying your local MP, lobbying one of the junior ministers, lobbying one of their staff members, to see whether or not there's opportunity for discretionary spend, and there's lots of opportunity for ministers and MPs to make some discretionary spending announcements. And you don't know whether you'll get something if you don't ask, and if you don't ask, you just don't ever get it. So the thing is about making sure that you get in front of people. Think of positive announcements or events that they can join you on to capture their interest, and also the media's interest. So they're obviously looking for positive stories that they can get in front of the media and in front of the community, so that they can, look like they're supporting, various groups, whether that's their local electorate or a particular niche audience or a particular association or a particular cause. There's all of those things. Zoe, I think I've answered your question about the timing of the next election. I think it's probably May, but my bet is as good as anyone's. Bear with me, sorry, I just... Oh, that was good. How did I do that? One sec. Sorry. So get to know the new players in the Morrison government, and there's been several key changes. So those ones that I announced before, that will mean obviously there's also a shift of advisors with those ministers. Usually they they take them with them to their new portfolio. Not always, but a lot of the time, depends on whether they're policy specialists or who they are. So there'll be a number of advisors that will also have shifted. Do your research on the new ministers. You can do that online. Approach their offices and speak to their advisors. Pick up the phone. Don't do that. You'll never know. if you email, if you don't know who they are, you need to call and find out the name of someone to talk to. If the office won't give you their names, then you need to probably email the diary secretary, who will hopefully pass on to the relevant advisor your request about wanting to speak to someone. And then you need to pursue that. And rather than let it sit, probably call every 2 or 3 days just to see politely whether there was anyone there that you could speak to about a particular issue or particular matter. Put forward constructive, simple ideas, shovel ready as I called it. And both while, the government and the opposition are squarely focused on the election, your organisation shouldn't recoil from putting forward major policy ideas. And I think, the meetings that I've been having with people, the meetings that I've been having with ministers and shadow ministers, et cetera, has been, they've been asking us for, policy approaches. What would a policy look like on this space? What would a policy look like on that particular issue in the health space? What would a policy look like on that particular association and that particular sector look like? And so that doesn't necessarily mean you have to give them a really huge document that you struggle with and you don't have time to resource. We're talking 2 or 3 pages in the first instance, because these people don't put out a lot of detail during the election campaign. They're not necessarily looking for huge documents and huge complex announcements. What they're looking for is some sort of ideas, things that they can work on, that they could announce. And we're talking about both government and the opposition. My view would be probably to give them both the same thing. You may have a different attitude from different sides of the government or the opposition. You may have some personal relationships with one side or the other. You may know a local Liberal MP or a local Labor MP better than you know some others. Work with all of those contacts and making sure that you are, mobilising and, leveraging off all of those opportunities and all of those contacts that you do have, because this is the time to do it. Absolutely, it is the time to do it. The point that I would make is you need to be prepared, you need to do your research, you need to come up with a few ideas, and then you need to make contact with people, and then you need to keep going and be pretty relentless. By that, I don't mean rude. I don't mean sorry, Michelle. I actually live just 45 minutes out of Canberra, and whilst I'm very close to the nation's capital, part of the problem is that sometimes the internet's a little bit strange. Obviously don't recoil from putting ideas to people who that are sort of pivotal around those, policy ideas. And if they've got spending figures attached to them, that is totally fine as well. Don't be scared of that. That's totally cool. So, sorry, I'm just moving pages. Sorry. No. Here it is. So develop a timeline of targeted strategic government engagement activities is what I would suggest you do right now. Obviously start off by doing research, essentially identify the targets and what the requirements might be for the meeting, and request that meeting, and then make sure you're prepared for the meeting. Develop a tailored leave behind document, and by that I mean 1 page, with an infographics, great, something that's really simple and it can explain at a glance exactly what it is you're wanting to do. The producing some e-kits, that's if raising awareness. So one of the things we often do with government is that we will produce some content that we will send to them and say, look, we're approaching on behalf of a particular organisation. They're doing X or Y, or there's this particular initiative around this particular health outcome. or whatever it is, would you mind distributing this to your electorate, and provide them with an image, a draft blog post, a draft tweet, Facebook post, etc. And we get an astounding amount of take up from those. So it's a really good thing to do. Hosting an event in Parliament House, you need to get in pretty quickly and get that event booked. The next year's calendar hasn't been announced yet, but as soon as it is, people get in there and they book out. They book out really quickly. Engage the media to raise your profile. Obviously, when you're doing all of these things, boosting the engagement at the same time. So, the media can help augment what you're doing. So that's the last. Sorry, that is the last page. This has been quite a quick one. I'm just trying to. It's just not working for me today. That's the last slide for today. If anyone's got any questions, I know someone's just said they're going to access the YouTube video. Please pop them up now. Con has just asked me a question. To what degree and in what way should leave behind material be tailored to individual people? I think it could be tailored really particularly, if you're going into government versus opposition, for example, the government, you might be asking about a particular initiative and you want some money. You can talk to the opposition about that money, but right now they don't have any control over the money. And so I suppose for the government, they need to see a little bit more information about how that money will be spent, what the benefit of that money would be. From the opposition's point of view, they're probably interested more in an overview and a big picture situation, because they're not going to be allocating any money right now. So I think that's a way of sort of tailoring it between government and opposition. You can also tailor it between portfolio to portfolio. So say you're having a particular, I was in Parliament a couple of weeks ago when the leadership thing was on with Mind Australia, a mental health carers organisation, and we were in Canberra with about 30 other carers organisations for sort of a carers lobbying effort, which is sort of a start of a 3-year campaign. And we went to lots of different ministers and lots of different MPs, and we tailored the leave behind material quite a lot depending what the meeting was, and certainly there was the approach of the meeting as well. So yes, you can. Really depends on how much resourcing you've got. And what I would do though is, whatever you do, is make sure you follow up. I've been involved with a lot of campaigns and a lot of engagement activity with not-for-profits, and they've wondered why they just haven't got any action. They've started, they've gone in there, they've had a meeting, the meeting's been very, very polite, very respectful, but then nothing happened. And I think one of the things that you need to make sure that you always do is you always need to have a point that you can go back and reference and follow up. So almost agree that at the end of the meeting and say, well, I'll come back to you about that. I'll give you some more information about that, and we'll come back to you in a week or two to ask you about that question. So there's almost like a sort of a little, agreed course of action at the end of the meeting, like you normally do with most meetings. That's just how you usually do it, particularly with an advisor. That's usually the way you would work at a meeting. Dimini's just asked what language is useful at the moment for us, hints on how to segment the current MP and minister market, e.g. not ignoring independents. Absolutely, and I don't mean by saying Labor or the government there to ignore independents or the minor parties. Absolutely, they've all got a voice. Pauline Hanson, anyone really has got a voice. You've got to obviously be careful about who you're talking to and what issues you're putting in front of them, because sometimes those issues can, that goes for any MP or any government or opposition MP, and you don't really, sometimes we've just communicated to government because, we didn't want to jeopardise the possibility of getting, particularly in the last 6 months, we didn't want to jeopardise the possibility of getting funding from the government by having gone to the opposition, and the ramifications of that were that, they would then go, well, we're not going to fund you because you've gone and told people about it, and then, it's gone public. So sometimes you've got to be careful about who you're telling what. You've got to think those things through. It's not about, sort of standing outside the building with a placard and hoping that it's all going to be okay. It's things are much more complicated than that these days, and it is about playing a game. And if that means that you have to be careful about how you're approaching people, then that's certainly something that I would advise. Now, someone's asked me, Philippe has said, what are some of the ROIs to show your actions are effective? Well, I think the ROIs for engagement is, how many meetings you're able to get. You'll get a lot of meetings if you persist. It's really easy to get meetings, I find, if you keep asking and keep persisting. The ROI really comes down to what they're prepared to do and the ongoing engagement. You're never going to get everything you want in the first instance, and it might take you 2, 3, 4 years to achieve stuff. You just don't know. And so if that's the case, then you've got to think about what that ROI is, I suppose, is, what sort of movement is there towards what your objective is. You've got to set those objectives and then see how what your activities are is helping to move you towards that. Is it funding? Is it policy changes? Is it implementing a new public health approach? What is it? And then think about how you might want to meet that objectives. You're not going to get all of those things in a few weeks or a few months. Never will you achieve that. It would be very unusual for you to do that. But at the same time, you really do need to set some objectives and be clear on what those are. Yeah. Diana asks me, how long does it take to get a meeting? It depends on, you said, is it possible to get a meeting the next week? Well, probably not usually. Maybe with a backbencher, maybe in a non-sitting week in their offices locally. With the minister, probably not, unless you're a pretty big organisation and you know them and it's a pretty important issue. We always try to schedule in our plans a month or two out, and then we try and build a plan around, when we've got one or two that become available, we then go, okay, we will then build the plan around that, the engagement plan. And it's never possible to get everyone that you want in the same week that you're down in Canberra or wherever you are, whether it's a state or federal parliament. It just isn't. It just isn't. Next week, probably not. You might be lucky, but it does take persistence. You might be lucky that you do get a meeting next week. But my thing to you, Diana, would be, if you don't ask them, you never get it. And I think it's about being polite, trying to find out who the person is at the end of the phone that you're talking to. Is it Sue or Jim or Amanda or who it is at the end of that phone, and treating them like they're people, because the diary people are often maligned and they bear the brunt of a lot of the engagement requests, and it's a hard, tough gig. They work really long hours and you've got to be really polite to them too. And so if you can give them respect, say hi to them, how's their day going? When I ring Parliament House, the APH switchboard, the main switchboard, I always thank those women who put me through to people's numbers, and they will often stop and say, oh, thank you, because I don't think many people thank them, and I think it's underrated, really, thanking people. So I think the nicer we are to people, and the more we can build relationships with everyone in these networks, I think the better that we often are placed to get those meetings. So best of luck, Diana, with your meeting, seeking your meetings in the future. Now, Michelle asks, what level of detail do you need to give to get a meeting? You know, if you're a small organisation, they may not initially want to meet with you. Look, what I tend to do, a lot of ministers, it's a bit of game playing. I don't often want to tell people exactly what I want to discuss at a meeting, because sometimes they'll go, oh, if that's what it is, well, here's my statement on that from 3 months ago, and that's fine. Whatever. So, you often are, or you don't, I don't want to give them that much detail, because what we do is then we preempt them or their advisors being really over prepared for the meeting. Sometimes I actually like the element of surprise, because what you do is you sort of blue sky it a bit with them. You sort of throw it at them. And if it's a minister's office, they often are very prepared, and you don't want them to be overly prepared or have someone from the department there, because then everything becomes very formulaic and it's very structured, and you don't get any spontaneity in a meeting, which is not good. So what I would prefer to do is, and I know if you're a small organisation, Michelle, that might be tricky, but it's about perhaps giving them the vision that why you want to meet with them, rather than the detail of something that they can rule in or out or research and come back to you and say, oh, well, actually, we've done that, or we've done this, or we've done this. Perhaps say to them, we're coming to you about this particular issue. We've got this particular issue. We've got some really clear approaches that we'd like to discuss with you about how we could solve X or Y, or deal with X or Y, or whatever it is. We'd like to discuss that with you. So giving them a hint, but not too much detail. And I wouldn't ever give them, it depends on the relationship, but I wouldn't ever give them, everything before you go to the meeting, particularly if it's a minister's office, because what will happen is they will just get everything. The department will brief them. And what you really want to do is, when it's hard, it's a bit of a case-by-case scenario in some respects, but you really do want to get a little bit of spontaneity in the meeting, rather than having this sort of formulaic response that the department has written for the minister, and they rely on in the meeting, and then they don't really say anything. If that helps, Michelle. So if no one else has any more questions, we'll probably wrap it up there. And thanks so much for everyone's questions. They were really good. I do wish you all the best of luck in the next few months. And who knows, we might be coming back in the next month, and there might be another leadership challenge, and we'll do it all again. But if I was the government, I would probably try and avoid one, probably. But sillier things have happened in politics. But thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day, and thanks for listening. The next webinar is going to be on October the 1st on digital marketing campaigning. I thought that might be useful, particularly at the moment, some low budget approaches to using the best platforms and how-tos. So we'll circulate that to people who've been on this, and if you want to join in with that one, it'll be on October the 1st. Thanks so much, and have a lovely day.